What's up, War Room special Wednesday AM drop. Hopefully, you listen to the podcast already. If not, double dip. Listen to them both today. The final time Connor and I will record before his wedding. We will have some type of full schedule reaction on the feed Thursday or Friday. We will have Buck the Trend. We will have TOJ Talks. We will make sure everyone that is sitting around at the different tables is working still this weekend, so you guys still get content. But we got two great prompts tonight, CR. One in the draft wheelhouse, one in the nostalgia wheelhouse, which is why we had to attack both of these. And should be more than enough to fill out a War Room episode. First one, we've been letting this one marinate for like a week or so. It's from Jay Webb. And effectively, the construct of the question is, if you could go back in time and redo Joe Douglas's first round picks over the past 5 years, what would you do? And it has to all flow together. So you're building the best actual team. You can't just, take 5 tackles in a row.
Yeah.
So how would you go back in time and do it? So we get to talk about the last 5 drafts and how we would piece this together. And I don't usually do this, but I actually jotted down notes on this one.
I looked ahead a little bit for this one. I
had to cheat.
Yeah, you got to be prepared.
I had to be prepared. And then the back half of this, we're going to talk about the best Jets receiver room since 1998. Another great prompt that we got in the Discord from Cooler Than Cool. And we'll wrap up with some other receiver-centric questions we got. So I'm going to go first, and then I want you to react to what I say. You're closer to the draft. You remember these classes better than me. I did this under the assumption that the Jets ultimately just hang on to Sam Darnold, and he plays the Zach Wilson role until they ultimately get Aaron Rodgers. They end up in the same spot. Darnold's probably a little better than Zach Wilson, but they just try and fail with a different young quarterback. So I go back to 2020, and I don't think this one's going to surprise anybody, including yourself. I think you'll probably have the same answer. I'm taking Wirfs over Becton. So now we've started right with taking the correct tackle, who is just really good the past 5 years, and you have that one spot filled. And God, that makes everything so much easier going forward when you nail that pick in a premium position. Now, 2021, my first pass at this, I put Jamar Chase because I'm hanging on to Darnold. I'm not taking Zach Wilson. Then I was like, we're still going to get Garrett, and there's other receivers. Then I was like, I should go with Penny Sewell. And then I was like, then I was looking again at the class, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take Micah Parsons.
You have to.
He's like the best defensive player in football. So let's not overthink it. Let's just take Micah Parsons and be ridiculous at edge rusher. I'm still, since I didn't go offensive line, I'm still taking AVT where they got him. I'm going to hope in this alternate reality he's healthier. But now I have my interior Swiss Army knife. I got Parsons. I got Wirfs. I'm not touching anything in 2022. You don't mess with something that good. Not messing with Sauce, not messing with Garrett, not messing with Jermaine Johnson. Now I have Parsons and I have Jermaine Johnson. And maybe in this world, they also still have Huff as a situational edge rusher. We're good at edge. We don't even have to think about that position basically forever. We're in a great position. They don't have to spend the capital to get Hassan Reddick. We got Wirfs and AVT on the offensive line. Last year, I'm not taking Will McDonald. Surprise, surprise. I'm taking Jordan Addison because now I have him and now I have Garrett Wilson.
I like
and
that.
Now I have my receivers for the next 8-10 years. We're still not talking about the receivers that they need. And then this year, I'm still taking Fashanu because I need another tackle at this point. And maybe they got Morgan Moses or Tyron Smith still to help fill the gap. But now I look at it going into this year, I still have Rodgers. I got Wirfs and Fashanu. I still got AVT. I have Parsons, JJ, and let's say we still have Huff rushing the passer. And I got Garrett Wilson and Addison as my number 1 and number 2. And I feel like that's a pretty damn good offense. Now, what's fun about this exercise is they're really starting in 2021. There's a million different paths you can go to build this out. How would you go about doing it?
So I had a lot of the same thought processes as you. What I got hung up on in 2020 was it seems like the obvious is to take Wirfs. But when I went down, I do consider CeeDee Lamb in that spot. And that was something that was really interesting to me at the time. I remember on Stick to Football at the time, I used to talk about this. I'm like, what do the Jets do if all the tackles are gone? And at the time, I had grouped them Andrew Thomas, obviously Jedrick Wills and Wirfs. I thought Becton was kind of in his own tier just on the outside looking in. And there was always risk with Becton where I was like, damn, you could argue to take CeeDee Lamb. And I loved CeeDee Lamb that year. And But I think when you go down to it, you do the obvious and you take Wirfs because it's a building block. And you bring up the great point. You're not touching 2022, and you can argue with competent quarterback play. Garrett Wilson is every bit of what CeeDee Lamb is for this offense. Stylistically, they are not very different. So that's why at the end of the day, you go Wirfs there in 2020. Now, 2021. You're right. It's really dealer's choice. You probably the best choice is Micah Parsons because that's just ridiculous to picture Micah Parsons in Saleh and Ulbricht's
20 sacks a season for the next 10 seasons.
It's really Micah Parsons and Quinnen Williams on the same front is out of this world. And you're getting Garrett Wilson, so as much as you'd love Jamar Chase, you're not like, how can you pass on Jamar Chase? Penei Sewell's really interesting to me, but you got Wirfs. The answer is Micah Parsons. You take Parsons at 2. Now, 14, I guess it's not really that interesting. Right now, are we doing this where you're only counting the first round picks, right?
Yes.
Like you can't like, it'd be stupid if we do this exercise and last year's draft we go, I'm not taking Will McDonald, I'm taking Puka Nacua. Like that's not really fair.
Can't do that. Yeah.
Like let's be fair to Joe Douglas. Like nobody was taking Puka Nacua in the first round. So I think it is AVT, which is really funny. 2021, and I remember I did this draft out of our Atlanta studios for Turner that year. It was the first draft after like the second draft after COVID, but like the first one that you could like go outside.
Yeah.
And so it was me, Lefko, of course, and Aqib Talib on the Bleacher Report desk. We had this massive set. And part of it probably was massive because COVID was still like precautions were still very much in place. And then two is that like those are the studios that like you see inside the NBA and NHL on TNT. Like they're massive studios. Yeah. So I remember after AVT got picked, it was just this wild run of ineptitude. And it's not even really hindsight. Because I remember when I knew Mac Jones was going to go in the first. I never liked Mac Jones as a first rounder. But not even that. Like Zaven Collins, Alex Leatherwood, Jamin Davis, and Kadarius Toney, and Caleb Farley all go in the next like 7 or 8 picks. And all had massive flaws. So there's not a player in this first round that you'd even consider. It's a horrific second half of the first round, and AVT is really good. We just need him to stay healthy. So yeah, it's AVT. I am following the same path as you, but that's because it's what logic applies. 2022, Sauce has been out of this world. Garrett Wilson's been awesome. I mean, you're not changing those picks. You're just not. That's another draft that it's pretty ugly, outside of like after that. Like you get some real ugly looking picks. Kyle Hamilton's been good for the Ravens, but like Trevor Penning and Treylon Burks and Kenny Pickett. Oh, God. Trent McDuffie's been really good for the Chiefs. Kyrie Elam and Quay Walker, I don't personally think have been very good. Walker's gotten better. Linderbaum's been really good for the Ravens. Shocking the Ravens make a good pick. Jermaine Johnson at 26 looks like a steal for the Jets. So, yeah, you keep that first round. All right, so we go to 2023. This is where it is really... I feel like I'm landing the same way you did. This is probably where I can change it. So you had them take Jordan Addison.
Yep.
At 15. Not crazy at all. I liked Addison. He was wide receiver 2 for me in that draft. He went wide receiver. God, it's so weird to me. He was the 4th wide receiver taken. He's small, and I traditionally don't gravitate towards small receivers, but Zay Flowers went before him. Quentin Johnston went before him. It's really nuts to me. So, okay, I'll tell you what I would do at 15 now, and this will probably really surprise you. I would have taken Kalijah Cansey, who...
Ooh. Shout out Buck to Trent. Dan loves that, I know.
Kalijah Cansey was... he was at least in my top 15. I was really high on him. The idea... If the Jets were trotting out Micah Parsons, Quinnen Williams, and Kalijah Cansey, and Jermaine Johnson...
Yeah.
That might be the best front 4 we've seen in football in a very long time. Yes. You're having that front 4 for the next 8 years. So Yeah, that would be where I would have gone. If I went for another wide receiver, I would have went with JSN. I really liked JSN. I think he's going to be a really good slot for a long time. So him and Garrett would have been a lot of fun. But just off of talent, I would have went Kalijah Cansey in that scenario. So you would have ABT and Wirfs on the line just like you did. You'd have Parsons. Yeah, and the difference is you're just getting a more impact player at 15 than McDonald. And we're taking into account that like the guys that went in front of him aren't available. Of course, that's how this exercise goes. Like, would I have loved to have Broderick Jones or Darnell Wright or something like that, or Jalen Carter? Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting. I think I'd land on Cansey. I can make an argument for Christian Gonzalez because then you'd have 2 shutdown corners for the next half decade. Addison's really good. I like that you went that direction. And that's kind of where you land because it's not really inspiring after that, unless you want to go tight end with Kincaid. But I wouldn't go tight end.
No, and you stay fashion with last year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he was my 7th overall player. They got him at 11. Positional value, I would have taken Fashanu over Bowers. And then there's not really a lot going on after that. That was unconventional to me. Yeah, the Jets actually, it's weird in 2024. It's funny, I didn't really fully realize this till now. They went very chalk for me, which it's funny watching it being a Mets, Jets, Rangers fan. It feels like for so long, those teams don't really often go consensus or chalk. And the last draft for all of them, and this is like super deep, because you can tell how much of a draft nerd I am, but the Mets took a player that was like a top 20 consensus at like 30. The Rangers got a great player in Gabe Perreault at like 22 that should have went top 10. And no surprise, like that prospect is performing to incredible standards. He's one of the best college hockey players. And I think this will pay dividends for the Jets, where they took a guy that really was a no-brainer top 10 player, in my opinion, and got some overthinking. And Fashanu will be a top 10 player coming out of this draft when you go consensus. I'm not saying you always need to go consensus, but people often forget consensus exists for a reason. And it's because that means the highest amount of people are landing on that player in that area. So if the highest sample size of analysts and people studying this think a player is good, the chances of him being good are higher than the sample size of people thinking a player was bad being good. It's such a stupid thing to break down because it sounds very simple, but people really do overthink this stuff, and organizations overthink this stuff. And I like when the Jets don't overthink these things.
Of course they do. Yeah, I mean,
Will McDonald, fine
yeah.
player, consensus, not 15, not top 20.
There's such a long run up now, and there's such an industry built up around the draft that, of course, certain players get overanalyzed and basic things get overthought about. And, for once, I think we feel like, you know what, the Jets just like, we went back to the start, like we would have been thrilled to get this guy where they got him. Not dissimilar from the Garrett Wilson conversation we had a few years before that. And you feel really good about the
perfect
value.
Callback.
Like, we just got a really good offensive player at a premium position, so we take it. Everyone, we want you to make sure to check out Underdog. There is a new deposit match set up for first-time customers who use promo code Badlands when they play Underdog Fantasy. Get a 50% deposit match up to $250. PGA Championship picks now live. Best ball drafts live. We've already done like 5 or 6 here. We're going to do another one soon. NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, NFL pick'em is not far off. That is promo code Badlands for a 50% deposit match up to $250. CR, big summer of us ramping up these drafts and getting ready for the regular season.
That's right. A lot of baseball, of course, if you need, to get through these footballless months. And then, listen, it's going to be nonstop best ball, especially with this rookie class. It's been wild to watch how early they're going, but listen, they deserve it. So we're ready to roll, and the Badlands community will be ready to roll as well.
Amen. That is Underdog Fantasy promo code Badlands. All right. Next question was the Jets' 5 best receiver rooms in the post-1998 Keyshawn era. So versus just going vibes, I looked up the aggregate stats of the top 3 receivers every single year. And most of these generally lined up to about what I expected. Number 1 for me, Marshall, Decker, Anua. And really this was Marshall and Decker who aggregated all of the stats. But 26 touchdowns, 2,800 yards between the three of them. Decker, Marshall over 1,000 yards each. Marshall effectively had the best season any Jets receiver has ever had by a pretty comfortable margin.
Yeah.
It's just like you would have to take that room because we've in an individual season, just for one season. I don't know if a Jets receiver has ever played any better. It's a one season sample size, but
him and Don
ridiculous.
Maynard are the only other guy in the conversation.
That's it. I mean, like his season is such an outlier to like everything else in Jets history that, and he had an excellent number too. Like Decker was in his prime, was terrific. They line him up in the slot where he had size, and Anua was still really young there. Like I think he only had like 300 yards that season, but he was coming on down the stretch. He had the game-winning play effectively against New England in overtime that set up Decker's touchdown. So you have to go with them as your top three. Number two, Keyshawn Corbett, Dedrick Ward in the 1998 season. That was 22 touchdowns, 2,500 yards. That's like prime Keyshawn, prime Corbett, and Ward has like just an awesome pure deep threat who caught like 4 50-yard touchdowns that year to like ice games. And that's why the production is where it's at. And that is not too far behind that group. They didn't have quite as many touchdowns because Marshall was insane, but statistically, they were in spitting distance. And Ward was really a more productive number 3 than Anua was. 3, and this one kind of surprised me, but the numbers justify it. 2002, the Pennington year where he came in and they started slow, but they went on the tear with him and won the division. Coles, Corbett, Moss was that. That was the year they overlapped like at the right time. And that was 18 touchdowns, 2,300 yards. That was a good balance. And this was like Coles' best year. Coles was, I think he had like over 1,200 yards this season. You still had Corbett being productive. Moss was like coming into his own, and those as a top 3 were there from a production standpoint. Now, I was doing this and I was like, shit, I haven't even gotten to like the Flight Boys yet and like the more recent Rex years. But really, there's only one year to consider because 2009, they didn't get Braylon until like week 5. And the rest of that group was kind of like questionable outside of Cotchery's consistency. And 2011 was sort of like the mess with Plaxico and Mason and then like losing Cotchery. So 2010 is when you had Edwards, Holmes, Cotchery for the full season. And that was 15 touchdowns, 2,000 yards. Again, that was not a pass-heavy offense. It's why the stats are kind of like dwarfed by Marshall, Decker, and Anua. But from a pure talent and from a clutch perspective, they have to be there in the top 5. Those guys were like all the definition of clutch. And they were doing it, and we love Sanchez. And the other guy's episode on Sanchez this week was great, but there were some limitations there. Last but not least, 2008, the Favre year. Cotchery, Coles, Chancey Stuckey rounding it out. 15 touchdowns and 2,000 yards, effectively just as productive as the 2010 group, because, you forget like they had like that game against like Arizona where Favre threw 6 touchdowns and like you still had good Coles and Cotchery, and Stuckey was like fine as a number 3. So